saying no is very difficult. I guess it's very tough to say no. So we're very agreeable. Humans usually are very agreeable, so it's very difficult. But there's so much clarity in just telling people like, yes, I can do that. No, I can't do that. It feels awkward in the moment because you want to be a people pleaser, but I would say being very crisp and clear about what you are in art and can and can't do just makes your life so much easier. And I think people respect you more if you're like, he's very clear about what he will and won't do.
Hey nerds, welcome to the Data Podcast for Nerds, where we get to talk to amazing professionals and ask them how they're using data to solve the world's problems. We're highlighting all of the tips, tricks, and nerdy fun bits to make you the best data professional you can be. Today with us, we have Aaron Wilkerson. How are you doing today, Aaron?
Hello, everyone. I'm doing well today. Thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We start off our episodes by understanding people's origin stories. So, if you could please tell us about your background and how you got to where you are today in your career.
Sure. So I always say I'm one of the rare folks who have been in data my entire career. So actually, my bachelor's degree is in electrical engineering. But then I think I realized towards my senior year of college that I didn't want to do engineering outside of college. So while I was graduating with that, I knew that I didn't necessarily see a future myself in engineering. So went to a career fair my senior year of college, and then heard about this thing called consulting and IT consultant. So I actually went to my first job was with Accenture. So I was an analyst, starting off my career at Accenture. And my first job working for Accenture happened to be with like a reporting team. So this was back in, I think, 2006 or seven. So this was, business objects, Cognos, all those kind of tools before they all got bought out by the big players. So we were just building out reporting environments. So we build out business object servers, add security, do Cognos, like help administer cubes and things like that. So, I mean, at that time, I didn't really know anything. 'Cause I think back in those days, like data wasn't necessarily a career path. Yet nowadays, it's like everyone talks about data. You can study data and get a degree in it. But I think back then it was like you can get a degree in like computer science or like information systems. I didn't really know what that was. So IT, I didn't really know. I mean, to me, I think IT was more like help desk and like laptop repair. Like I didn't know that that was like a real career path, that much as it is now. So did that. Really dug into the like kind of technology SME. So I was kind of like the business object administration SME. So I read all the books. Like learn everything I could know about that. So I leveraged that because during the recession, I got let go of my first project. So I moved to a different project in Boston, still doing business objects administration. I was kind of the go-to guy for that. Then I met my soon-to-be wife. We got engaged. I realized I didn't want to do that forever, like traveling back and forth. So worked for a local hospital system. So still doing business objects administration. And then my leader tapped me on the shoulder and asked about this thing called ETL, which I didn't know what the heck that was. So got into ETL development, learned about databases. Back then, that was really Oracle based. So got into Oracle. Um, really kind of was very curious. So kind of really dug into data warehousing, learned about what data warehousing was. Because I was kind of really big into the reporting side, but the back end side I didn't know. But through those years, I really learned about the back end databases, data warehousing, and things like that. So we eventually became like kind of like a data architect. So really dug into the technical sides of the data world. Then kind of bounced around, then got into leadership. So I would say about 10 years ago is when I first got into like architecture and team lead and became manager. And at that point, luckily my skill sets helped out because I found those really early data jobs. You're doing both, right? You have to do the back end warehousing part, but also you have like people who are also building out your reporting and things like that. So luckily I had all the skill sets to do that, so I knew how to do both those from my previous roles. So, I've been doing daily leadership for the past 10 years, like between manager roles, senior manager roles, and now in a director role. So I would say I've done pretty much every job in data. I've not done any kind of data science, like pure data science, machine learning type of roles at this point, but any other job in data, I've done it. So luckily, I been around enough. I can speak the lingo. I can talk shop. So I would say now really digging into data leadership because I found that you know we don't really have, let me see, we have technology and platform challenges, but I think through strong leadership there's a connection to the business that's really lacking, which is why I think we have some challenges in the data realm. Is just that I think some of our leaders kind of struggle sometimes, which I struggle too, like trying to connect to the business and trying to show why things matter, why are we doing these things, why do we need money for a new platform. So I think that's what I'm kind of really hunkering into, is making that connection and kind of translate between the two. But yeah, I've been working, I think it's coming up on year 18 now, all in data. So yeah,
Yeah. You have a lot of experience. I have so many questions.
yeah.
So, starting in college, you mentioned that you were in the electrical engineering space, but you pivoted. Was there a particular project that you were like, okay, no, this is not what I want to do?
No, I think I had enough self awareness to look around at my peers, because I went to school with some very smart guys, and they were kind of like your prototypical nerds. I would say, I call myself a data nerd, but those were like engineering nerds. Were like they all had like these electronics benches like at their homes. So they were like toy around and play around with like electronics and building circuits at home. And I just, to me, I was like, yeah, I don't do that. And they were just very smart. Like when it came to homework, like I'd be struggling with a problem. They're like, oh, I figured that out yet. Or we'd be in labs and they would just figure out labs. So I would say that I knew that I could figure things out, but I wouldn't have been like a C or a B player. But I was going to school with A players in engineering school. And I knew that I was not an A player. So that's where I kind of did some self assessment and said, you know what, like I could go this route and be like a so engineer. But like I just knew that that wasn't the thing for me at the time. So it wasn't the project, it's just more like observing over like my last couple years, just like these guys are way smarter than I am. They're way better at this than I am, and I need to go find the thing that I'm better at, because it's not this. I was a decent student. I got A's and B's in classes, but I just knew that there were people out there who were smarter than me, and rather than compete, I just need to find my own area.
I think that self awareness is so important, in the fact that you found it before you graduated and got into an industry that you didn't like is really, really cool.
Yeah, I actually had a job. I used to intern at General Motors in college. So I had a job offer at GM to be, I think it was going to be like in a like an HVAC group. I was going to be like a test engineer or some type of basic engineer out of college. So I had a job offer that I already accepted, like waiting on me. But at the time I just said, you know what, I don't want to do this. So I ended up having, so luckily I found something else. But yeah, I lucked out and like not having to like try something out and then realize I don't like this. And it's like, well, what do you do? So I was able to do a lot of that, back when I was in college, and, didn't have family obligations. So my expenses were pretty low. So I can kind of pivot around a little bit.
Yeah. So then, when you were trying to make the decision of what to do next, what attracted you to consulting?
I think it was I'm a naturally just analytical kind of problem solving. So I think it just appealed to me, as a 22 or 23 year olds. Like, well, you get to travel. It's kind of like you get to travel to different places. You don't stay still. You kind of bounce around from project to project. So you get to learn new things. You get to work with like the latest like trends and technology. So I think it was like the travel, the change, the variability of the work. So I think those like that kind of appealed to me at that age versus kind of working for just one place.
hmm I had a similar experience when I started off in auditing, in external auditing. So there was a lot of
Hmm.
travel, you're on different projects all the time. And I actually think that's very beneficial for folks that are data professionals, right? Just because you have to learn things at a very quick pace,
Yeah.
and there's always different projects that you're working on.
Yeah, you get to learn, like you're hired as like this SME and like professional. So people look at you as like, hey, like you're brought in to solve this problem, so solve that for me. So I think it helped me learn at an early age, like how to become like, how do you kind of master your craft? Like how do you dig into, like, if there's journals or articles, how do you read all the fine print to learn everything is to know about your area? Like when you're brought into a meeting, like how do you speak up with authority and say, yeah, this is what we should do. I've done this before and things like that. So yeah, just a lot of those kind of cool things. I mean, and there's a lot of people like me who kind of started with Accenture or consulting have since moved on. There's a lot of Accenture alumni. out there that I meet routinely. So yeah, I think it was just a common career, and also to them it's cheap labor. Like they get a bunch of really smart kids out of college, haven't worked on a bunch of projects. They don't have any obligations yet, so they can work long hours. But they know that a lot of those folks don't last in consulting forever. So they get some, cheaper labor, and then people move out to do other things in their careers.
So I want to quickly nerd out on something that you mentioned because I don't get a lot of folks on the show that have experience with Cognos. And so Cognos, how it's like structured in that cube format and it's very different than what we are exposed to today. Can you kind of explain that and then how it progressed to what we see today?
Yeah. So it's interesting. It was supposed to be. It kind of gets into like the idea of having like this perfect package of data. So the thought was like you would put like you have like these multi-dimensional cubes. So you have your dimensions laid out, your facts laid out, and all that data is kind of prepackaged. So once you have the model put together, it would crunch all that data and put it all together in this perfect cube. Since they called them cubes, it's kind of like a predefined like data set that's already like it's already put together, the data's already crunched and things like that. So that the user, all you have to do is kind of like just, do reporting or kind of pull data directly from that cube. You don't have to go against a database because it's already kind of prepackaged. So and then Microsoft does that with SSAS, like analytic services. So they kind of use the Cognos shell to kind of put together SSAS with the same thing where you define the different dimensions and all the data. They kind of you package this cube, and it kind of sits as a file. So a lot of times you need a lot of memory because you have these massive cubes that kind of sit on a server that you're trying to access instead of like going to like a database. So if you don't know how to write query or T-SQL things like that, a lot of that's predefined for you in those cubes. And that was kind of predecessor to Power BI. So if your users of Power BI, a lot of that started off as like Excel and like SSAS because if you look at like the original Power BI files on your desktop, like it actually has like SSAS cubes under as the background, and Power BI was like the front end of it. So I think a lot of those concepts, still resonate today in terms of having these predefined, pre-aggregated kind of data sets that kind of sit on like your laptop or your computer so that you don't have to like do all the compute against the database directly. You kind of have it prepackaged. You can do things like that. So I mean, there's a time where Cognos was huge in terms of people creating these cubes. Users liked it because they can just export from Excel. They can export to Excel, or they can kind of pull these particular data sets from it. They didn't have to know a lot about back end data modeling or like I said, how to write SQL and things like that. So I would say it was very popular. Then eventually IBM bought it, so it was Cognos. I think back then it was like Cognos Power Play like 7.4 or something like that. And then IBM bought them. So, I mean, honestly, I don't hear much about it anymore. I mean, I know people out there are still using Cognos, but I've seen it it's kind of like very similar to Business Objects got bought by SAP and they rebrand as like SAP Analytics, and then it kind of became an SAP thing. So yeah, I think there's many of us who were around BI in the early days probably had something around like Cognos and Cube, but those concepts are still around. They just kind of renamed them or think about them differently. But a lot of things we do now are based off like those frameworks around like original Cognos cubes and some of those technology patterns.
Okay. That makes sense because I see a lot of that happening just with other foundational skills where or techniques where the buzzwords slightly change a bit.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, but the business was a fan of it, especially those power users. So I think it really attracted those. We call them like we used to call them like power users or like those data analysts nowadays. Like they're the biggest of it because I think you have a group of people who are like, I just want to crunch data. I just want to crunch the numbers. I just need the data. I don't need a report. I don't want a dashboard. I just need the ability to crunch numbers. So that's why I think you see a lot of that kind of like the Excel plugins because people are like, I know Excel, so I can plug into these cubes to get the data I need and just crunch my numbers in Excel. So I think it had a huge audience and kind of those power users that just wanted to crunch numbers and data, and they didn't want to be bothered with knowing about like databases and data models and dimensional models and things like that. They're like, just give me the stuff I need.
Mhm. So, speaking of tools, you mentioned that now that you kind of went from contributor to manager to director, you're in the space of kind of evaluating these tools and what are the right tools to implement within your company for your team to use. What's your kind of approach to figuring all that out?
Yeah, it's. I would say in many cases, a lot of us are Microsoft shops. I would say I've been part of a lot of kind of legacy businesses that have been around for decades, if not centuries. So at a certain point, you kind of locked into a particular vendor. So in many companies I've been at, it's been Microsoft because you already have Office, you have Windows, you have all these different stacks. So I've kind of seen a lot of the platform tool decision depends on like, okay, well, first off, like does Microsoft have something because you're already in that, like you already have your enterprise agreement, so it makes contracts easier to say, if I just pull out the Microsoft tool, I don't have to worry about yet another vendor and another contract and another like line on my OpEx budget line item. So I would say, if you're kind of into a particular vendor, I think you kind of look to them first and say, what do you guys have? But not we don't everything we don't do with Microsoft. So I think you look for those deficiencies of hey, this tool does or they don't have a tool in this space. So how do we find something that can fulfill our needs? For example, when I was working at a previous company, we use a lot of these different like third party tools. So, like for example, doing API development or trying to like write APIs, we found some nice third party tools that will help us do APIs. If you work with a lot of just encryption, so if you're sending like files via SFTP a lot, you use those different tools to help you send data back and forth and encrypt it and decrypt it, just because you don't want to write the syntax yourself. So I would say a lot of tooling is just looking for like try to find people that can solve problems. Vendors that have kind of figured things out for you, so you don't have to worry about coding it yourself. You can just purchase their tools and use that. But some of that starts with hey, if I'm an AWS shop and you're looking for AWS solution, if I'm a Microsoft shop and looking, okay, is there an Azure? They change their name all the time, so the problem is you just don't know the name of it. So you got to talk to your Microsoft rep to figure out, hey, what's the latest name for this? And then you're just looking for different vendors out there that are solving very specific problems. Um, but the flip of that is also cost is a big thing, just because you know, do I want to spend another $100,000 for a tool that only my team is going to use? So I actually talk about that in terms of I think a lot of companies, like cloud companies in the data space, have kind of gone out of business because if your primary customer or data teams, like we don't have massive budgets, so I think that your tool has to be priced the right way because it may be a great solution for our team, but you know what? We have a small team. Um, it's only for us. It's not business use. The business won't use it. So I think it's very tough to kind of build tooling to solve data team problems because our budgets just can't sustain something. Very and also just more vendors, right? I don't want to have 6 or 7 vendors because that's more meetings I have to have. It's like conversations, it's POs, invoices. So I think also rationalization and simplification of vendors for tooling is also important, which is why you see people going with the same vendors is because it makes our life easier versus having 10 different contracts with renewal terms and POs each year. It's just a lot of work.
Yeah, I bet. So, what do you consider the most powerful tool that you and your team use right now, kind of to solve most of your questions?
So we're in the process of a kind of modernization to like Databricks, like the Lakehouse architecture. So we are in the midst of kind of migrating on to Databricks and Fabric. So I would say those are those latest best of breed tools we are digging into is some of the Databricks products to put data into. Also Fabric, Microsoft got this Fabric tool that can do some Lakehouse stuff, but also it does some nice integrations with Power BI as well. So I'd say though, but I think a lot of our work is still into SQL. I think a lot of people have traditional data warehouses that have some type of SQL, writing SQL packages to kind of store data and transform data and load data. So I would say really kind of those bare bones, traditional SQL Server data warehouses, but looking at some of those latest techniques around, like I mentioned, Databricks, Fabric. I know DBT is out there, so we're not really playing around much with like DBT. or like iceberg at this point, just because if the tools are doing what we need it to do, then trying to do a bunch of new things in a new area just may not be the right approach. So yeah, so I think it's kind of similar to what other people are doing in the space. I know Databricks is huge. We're not done much with Snowflake. I mean, I was first introduced to Snowflake, around 8 or so years ago, but I've not done anything with Snowflake. I know a lot of people using Snowflake, but I would say I think Databricks is some of the things that we're getting into.
Okay. And how are you using the tools? Like, if we're looking at trends, what are a lot of problems that you're solving with those tools?
I think kind of the data layers. So it's kind of the bronze, silver, gold methodology of if we're trying to build out reporting analytics capabilities, how do you transform data to get in a presentation format that you can easily crank out reports or kind of put together a semantic layer so that business users can use. So I think is trying to understand for the user population just what data do they need, and do they need to know the raw data, or do they need everything kind of calculated, right? So they just need certain metrics, measures. Does the business logic need to be in those, or things like that? So I think it's really trying to figure out the right layers of if you have data scientists and machine learning engineers, they may not want anything aggregated. They just want to they want the raw information to kind of figure things out. But if you're working with kind of more business users, they want things aggregated. They want it. They want the logic there. They want the measures and metrics defined, the KPIs defined, so they can pull it and have trust that they know that they know what it is. So I think it's that, and I think as you have larger volumes, trying to put things into different storage containers, translating it in for example, if you're using Power BI, do you translate it on the fly and calculate it, or do you do it within the database layer itself? So I think it's those types of traditional problems, but it's just like in a new type of discussion with like these new tools such as like Databricks, where um, in data warehouses just kind of you had just have one big thing with different schemas that you can break things into, but now you have these different layers like bronze, silver, gold that you can try to figure out where to put things and make your lives easier, hopefully.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the goal always. Just make your life easier.
Yeah, I mean, especially for like, for we have a separate data engineering team versus a business intelligence engineering team. So I would say our front end team, like they want to be able to, put together clean models that has either data aggregated. You can easily join data from different departments together on the same time scale. How do you look at historical data compared to, year over year and things like that? So there's just a lot of work behind the scenes trying to get data in a usable fashion just from like the raw just raw materials that you get in from different source systems.
So now that we're on the topic of tools, I think it's a really good segue into our fun bits. We can't forget spreadsheets, right? So we talked a little bit previously, and you mentioned that you use spreadsheets a lot for doing things like personal finance. So let's get into how you use spreadsheets.
Yeah, my wife makes fun of me because I have spreadsheets for everything. I mean, we like our lives. It's everything about our life is typically about the finances, right? So you can plan everything you want to. You got to make sure you know how to pay for it. So I would say, we're planning a couple different trips because we like to travel with the kids and things like that. So I have a spreadsheet just for like trips. So like making sure that I can budget like how much it's going to cost. So we're going to at the end of April, we're going to New York City. We're going on a cruise in July, so I have to make sure that like I calculate out like okay each line item, right, because you need to get things before the trip. There's like souvenirs, there's food, there's attractions. So easily, if you don't plan for that, it can blow your budget up, and then you just I don't we don't like to borrow money too much. So I have a spreadsheet for trips. Our normal like family budget, I have a separate spreadsheet for like our budget just for annual basis. We do charitable giving, so I have a spreadsheet for like charitable giving. Pretty much everything we spend money on, I have a budget for it. Even like our other accounts, because it's funny. Like as an adult, how many accounts you don't realize you have. Like you have your, your phone bill, you have your electric bill, your gas bill. You have essentially everything you log into. I have a spreadsheet just to track all that. Even I forget, like you forget the passwords, what's the login, if you change the password, what that is. So even like if with my spouse, I have to tell her like, okay, this is account. This is the login, so this is how you log into it. Um, yeah, anything and everything I have a spreadsheet for, because like to me, if you don't have a plan for it, it just disappears. Like the money just goes away somewhere. So I have to make sure that when we make these plans, like we can account for it. Even just like non-financial things, trying to plan out just with meals, just like what do we plan to do for the week in terms of like grocery shopping and meal planning. So I would say anything and everything you can plan out, I probably have a spreadsheet or a document that tracks that in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I'm a huge spreadsheet fan. I got one for everything. I would say my wife probably has zero, but I got tons of them all over the place.
You have enough for the both of you.
Yes, exactly. But it's a very helpful communication tool to say, "Hey, this is why we can or can't do this trip. Let me show you exactly why. Because we have this much money. The trip's going to be this much money. So either we have to cut something out, or it's not going to happen." So it makes it a very easy conversation versus like, "I feel like we can or I don't want to." It's like, "Hey, here's the numbers. Here's what we can and can't do." Um, yeah, to me, spreadsheets are life.
Yeah. Do you get complicated with them, or are they just very standard spreadsheets?
They can get complicated. I try to keep them simple, but I try to keep them simple just for my own peace of mind.
Okay.
um,
No macros or no Power Query
yeah,
or
yeah. What's funny, I've never actually learned how to use macros. Like, I'm kind of happy I haven't gone down the route, but yeah, I've never really dug into the world of macros and learning how to do macros. I've actually never. I probably created one for a class in like college, but I've never actually like put together a macro to use in a spreadsheet. To
okay.
truth be told. I know a lot of people nerd out and have like buttons and like connections to different things and tabs, but I've never done that.
They're really fun. They can get really addicting. I'd recommend it. So, speaking of learning, so learning new things, if you were to go out today and learn how to build a macro, what resources or what approach would you take?
To be honest, I would do YouTube. I mean, there's so much knowledge on YouTube right now. Like that's how I learned to do everything. Like I talk to people all the time. Like it's crazy that our parents never had that. So like everything, like if I'm doing from example our van, I had to replace the passenger side like side view mirror. So I looked it up on YouTube to figure out like step by step how do I do it. I just followed all the steps on the video and then boom, I changed that. Like simple plumbing things, simple electrical things. So I'm a huge like I look it up on YouTube and I figure out step by step. I just you watch it, you press pause, you watch the next steps, press pause. So I do step by step on YouTube. So if I was trying to learn how to do macros, I would just I would do a YouTube search on like macros. There would probably be hundreds of videos of it. So I'll just pick the top viewed one and just go like step by step on how to do macros. I mean, I found that to be one of the easiest ways to learn is just looking up a YouTube video, which most likely exists. Like even like for example, my wife is half Irish, so St. Patrick's Day is pretty huge. So I've been tasked with putting to like cooking the corned beef this year, which I've never cooked corned beef before. So I just looked up like, okay, how do you make corned beef? And I have a video. Later on today, I'll be putting it together. But yeah, I just found a video on like how do you make corned beef in the oven? And boom, like I found a video. Everyone's like, this is amazing. So I'm like following that step by step. So I mean, sometimes I can use books, but to me, I'm more like show me the video, go step by step, and like that's how I learn.
Yeah, I completely agree. I had a smoke detector that was beeping and I need to replace it and rewire it and all of that. And there's, of course, the user manual that comes along with it. I'm like, I'm not getting into that. Pulled up YouTube,
Yeah.
watched them do it, paused and, followed along and it's working good now.
Well, because the manuals they forget steps, but it's not very clear. Like I was like last, we have a new patio in our home, so I was putting there like a small storage unit. But the directions, you're like, okay, this doesn't make sense. So I watched the video, and the guy is like walking me step by step about how to assemble the storage unit. He even missed. He's like, yeah, the directions missed this step, and this step. So he's gonna save me time. But yeah, I see the directions, but I'm like, yeah, let me see if there's a video. Like I look at the model and like install, and there's probably a video on it. So I way prefer those where trying to like read directions and parse through what they meant when they wrote the directions.
Exactly. They always give like little tips too, like, oh, don't use this particular tool. It's a lot easier if you use this, or like, like little tips and tricks that the person that's putting together that video learned themselves that just isn't in that manual.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to keep things simple, very simple and efficient, right? Efficiency. Like, how do I get things done with the least amount of time possible? So I'm to keep things much as efficient as I can.
Absolutely. Well, do you have any other final recommendations or any words of encouragement for the listeners out there?
The biggest things that I'm kind of working through is trying to figure out, figuring out what you want. I mean, I was talking to someone about like career things recently, and a lot of the discussion was around like, hey, what is it that you want? Like, what is it that you're trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? 'Cause I think once you figure that out, then I think it's easier to have very specific conversations, and that even revolves around like in the data world. Like, okay, you talk to the business unit, hey, what is it you guys are trying to do or accomplish? But if they can't articulate that, it's very difficult to then like build something or try to solution something if they don't know what they want. So they understanding like what for anything, like being clear about I want to do this, not that, being very clear about what your expectations and intentions are, I think it's just a huge thing. And being very clear about, just the yeses and the nos. I gave a small presentation to a community, I think on Monday, just around the topic of saying no is very difficult. Like it's very tough to say no. We're very agreeable. Humans usually are very agreeable, so it's very difficult. But there's so much clarity in just telling people like, yes, I can do that. No, I can't do that. Like, yes, we're doing that. No, it feels awkward in the moment because you want to be a people pleaser, but I would say being very crisp and clear about what you are in art and can't do just makes your life so much easier versus leave is like, I don't know, maybe, possibly, perhaps. You just leave that leaves so much ambiguity out there and so much room for interpretation versus just saying like yes or no, I can't do that. And I think people respect you more if you're like, he's very clear about what he will and won't do. Um and I think those are the things that kind of top of mind right now, just from a leadership perspective, because if you have teams of people, like you have to ask those very critical questions, like, hey, what are we doing? Are we doing this? Are we gonna have it done by that day? When is that gonna be done? So, yeah, those are those things. I think even for a career perspective, I think being very clear about those things will help a lot of people. Just being clear about what you want, what you don't want, and then based off that, that'll help you say yes, I'll do this, or no, I'm not doing that.
Great advice. Well, thank you so very much, Aaron, for coming on the show and sharing all of your stories with us. If anybody has any questions for you, where can they find and or follow you?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn. Usually about 5 to 6 days a week, I'm posting on LinkedIn. I think that's how we got connected. So, go ahead and look me up on LinkedIn. LinkedIn, feel free to follow me. I have a newsletter. There's a link on my LinkedIn profile for my newsletter. So, yeah, I'm usually writing and talking about my history and career and talking about data stuff all the time. So, definitely you can find me there and feel free to interact with new people.
Well, thank you again. And as always, folks, happy learning. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Data Podcast for Nerds. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you want to transition your career and become a data professional, follow me on LinkedIn for even more tips, tricks, and nerdy fun bits.